Well, thank you for having me. I'm Françoise Vergès. I'm from Réunion Island, which is a French overseas, as they say, territory in the Indian Ocean. And I
Oh,
am
thank you.
a political scientist by training, and I got my PhD at Berkeley University.
Thank you very much. Because you have a wealth of experience in decolonization, feminism, and these are topics that are at the moment very important. Could you explain for us? So, in this interview, we would like to speak about the situation in Mayotte, the situation in Kanaky or New Caledonia. We will speak as well about um, the fact that in many of these French regions around the world, extreme right parties are getting very good results in the elections. So we would like to analyze all of this, and in order to understand the present time, we will need to understand the history of these regions, maybe specifically Mayotte and Kanaky, just for the sake of time. But just if you could explain how these regions became French and also what implication this had for the populations living in these regions.
Well, thank you for the question. Well, without going into too much detail, because it would be very long, as we know, France built a colonial empire. From the beginning, from the 15th century, when Europe started to launch colonization of the world. And so, under the king, already France had different colonies, mainly in the Caribbean and North America. But to go further, when there was then in Martinique and Guadeloupe, what they call Martinique and Guadeloupe in the Caribbean, Guyana in South America, and Réunion in the Indian Ocean. And Mauritius Island also, which was then Ile-de-France, was a French colony. That was the first colonial empire, which was a slave, where you had slavery. And so monoculture of sugarcane or coffee. So, and whether the enslaved were brought from different places of Africa and in the Indian Ocean, also from the rim of the Indian Ocean. So, switch to 19th century, the end of slavery, of colonial slavery. But before that, France has already launched a new colonization of what will constitute the post-slavery colonial empire, with Algeria, all West Africa, Madagascar, and what France called Indochina, which is Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. And France became the second greatest colonial empire after the British. So it was very important. Again, let's go further very fast. After World War II, the huge movement of decolonization, a lot of colonial war because France does not want to give independence, does not want to accept independence. So war in Madagascar in 1947, war in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia in the 1950, ending in 1954. War in Algeria, of course, the long war in Algeria, but also in Cameroon, everywhere, very tough repression, bloody wars, bloody colonial war. And movement, growing movement for independence everywhere. All these countries get their independence at different moments, but what remain today, what is, today, what is, French overseas territory, are Guyana, Martinique, Guadeloupe, and Réunion, which belong to the first colonial empire, under of slavery. And then, starting in, before even, the end of the abolition of slavery, or little after, the colony of Kanaky, New Caledonia, island in the Pacific also, and Mayotte in the Indian Ocean. We are, in the 19th century. So these constitute today still, the French. They are still French territory. None of them is independent. It's a very important for France. It gives it a place in the world, because it makes it the second maritime power after the United States. It also allows the French state to sit in the different, regional organization, Indian Ocean, South America, Pacific, and Caribbean. It's also bring, for research, scientific research, because the French can both study, Amazonia or volcanology in Réunion, or other things differently. It's very important also for French corporation because they have the monopoly for distribution. most things that we consume, eat, or whatever we need, or cars or furniture come from France. It's also so it's geopolitical importance, scientific, military importance, um, um, culturally also it can affirm the French presence in the different places of the world. And of course, it's also for cooperation. For instance, in Mayotte, there is this, they have discovered oil and gas, and will mean that French corporation, of course, will have, the privilege and, to be there rather than British Petroleum or other corporation. So it's a very important for France to hang on this territory, in which you had very strong movement, anti-colonial movement in the 50s, 60s, 70s, to the 1890s even, But there was a huge repression, censorship, leaders sent into exile, whether a union or political leader, incredible fraud, electoral fraud. The French state was very afraid of losing this territory after losing its, Algeria, Cameroon, and other colony. So he really hung on these territories. And even, for Mayotte belonged to the archipelago of the Comoros, which were, small kingdom. Um, Muslim very early, very early. And with different emir at the head of this different small kingdom. And in the 70s, France pushed for the fact that Mayotte separate itself, the population of Mayotte will separate itself from its sister island, and on which people who were family were living, and become French. So then, and we will go back to Mayotte. And Kanaky, New Caledonia, which was also colonized in toward the second half of the 19th century, was, of course, as for every colony, it was about dispossession, land grabbing, imposing private property. Kanaky, New Caledonia was the only colony where a French state built reservation for the population. So Kanak were forced to live in enclosure and had no freedom of circulation, and saw their land being taken and being stolen. So this is this is really a settler, settler colonization, full settler colonization in Kanaky. Kanaky has been populated for 1,000 years, and so the French arrived and say it was theirs. And also the Pacific Island, which where in fact a lot of nuclear tests. The French state has organize a lot of nuclear tests, and there is a lot of problem today. And the Pacific Island are asking for independence, and the French state is resisting. So,
and in the case of Kanaky, maybe it's a good time to maybe
okay.
dive into this specific region. Could we say that France operated a kind of great replacement, but in the other way that Trump and right-wing politicians would imagine it, bringing colonizers in order to make sure that in a referendum for independence, the Kanak people wouldn't be able to actually win a referendum? Is this a correct statement?
Yeah, that's a good question, because already during the colonization, the population of Kanak, was diminished very because of repression and mass killing. So there was, that goal was there from the beginning. In the beginning of the 20th century, there was already half of the population of Kanaky from the beginning, from when the French, arrived on the island. So there was already diminishing the population, as what all the settlers do in every colony. But then after, so this was, it was a penal colony, as you know. So, and then there was this discovery of nickel, and so that was very important. But it was really in the 1960s, 1970s that the French state organized effectively migration to this island to make the Kanak a minority in their own land. So massive migration, among them many people, many French settlers from Algeria, bringing with them right-wing ideology and the feeling that, okay, we were kicked out of, our place, we will not be kicked out again. So bringing, really a settler colonial right-wing ideology. And this continued because in 1972, the prime minister of France, his name was Pierre Mesmer, said, we have really to replace. So that was really said officially that Kanaky
There's a
should be.
letter, no, that circulates online, a letter
Yeah,
from him where he
it was
explains
an official
bringing
letter.
people from Réunion Island and the
Yeah, Réunion
mainland and so on.
Island and other places. It was absolutely official. It was not some kind of a letter, private letter. No, it was very clearly that this has to become, a massive, immigration of white have to be organized. So also people from Réunion, people from Wallis and Futuna, some Vietnamese, really replacing Kanaks. So that was extremely important. But this was also at a moment when the Kanak were also really organizing. There have been huge insurrection, 1878, 1909, and so on. But again, resisting. And the question of land, like, reappropriating land that had been stolen, occupying this land that they say, claimed they were theirs. So we had in the late 70s, early 80s, a lot of this movement of resistance and creation of different movements. You have assassination of this leader, for instance, Eloi Machoro in 1984, which was lead to 1988 to the massacre of OVA when, special forces, French special forces, attack Kanak activists and kill, 19 of them. All this, in total impunity, a lot of, of this killing have been, unpunished, And recently, again, to follow with this quite remplacement, because you do have a very strong colonial movement in Kanaky, or, the white people, very strong, very. When you listen, when you hear them, when they talk and you listen to them, it's the echo of the Pieds Noirs in Algeria, or the echo of, Israeli settler today. This kind of, we have the right to be here. This is our land. We brought hospital and road. The usual, colonial discourse. And so they are absolutely for this, the fact that the right to vote should be given to everyone who is in Kanaky at the moment of the referendum and the vote, which means you could be there just for 3 years. And after the massacre of Ouvéa, there was an agreement, in Paris between the Kanak and the French state, which was saying that no, the people who can vote, they will be frozen so that the Kanak will not become minority in their own country. So people who could vote would be those who had settled in Kanak in New Caledonia before that this agreement. And that was what President Macron wanted to, effectively say no, and that everyone, and impose that from top down, the law was voted at the National Assembly without consultation with the Kanak. And this was effectively triggers incredible, protest in New
So
Caledonia.
if I remember properly, as part of the agreement, there was a series of 3 referenda that were to be
Yeah,
organized, and
yeah,
Macron organized the last referendum in the
yeah.
midst of the COVID pandemic while people were still mourning and so on.
A
No?
lot of
Is that
a
what
lot
happened?
of Kanak, because of course, as everywhere, those who, the rate, mortality rate was highest among the Kanak community, like they were with Black community or Indigenous community elsewhere. So they were in mourning. They asked for the referendum to be pushed, back, to be delayed, and the French state refused. There was a huge abstention, but even though, so the pro-colonial movement won that referendum, and they started to say, okay, now, okay, done with that. We have to stop with this story. It's a very colonial move. It's absolutely to stop the anti-colonial, the pro-independence movement in Kanaky, New Caledonia. So this law that has been voted, in fact, as National Assembly, will have at the next referendum, everyone will have been able to vote, which means effectively the Kanak will be in the total minority. In number, not just in terms of ideas, but in number. So what is clear is that if that the French state will never, never, never decolonize. Will never accept the decolonisation. And one of the most recent news is like many leaders of the protest in March has been arrested and sent to jail in France, which means like 20,000 kilometers away from their family and friends, which is also a colonial policy to exile political prisoner, away from their community and family and friends. So yes, it's very clear with Kanaky. What Kanaky has brought back is that France has had settler colonies and still is pushing for settler colonization today. And we
And you say that they took Kanaki by force, but here they are trying to maintain power by force as well. No, I think the reaction Macron
yeah,
had
yeah, but as I say,
to this independent movement was to bring
yeah,
more
yeah.
soldiers and police
Yeah,
force.
yeah. But what we really have to say that every time you have a movement for more autonomy or independence, whether in Guadeloupe, Kanaki, or elsewhere, it's really very brutally crushed because you have a like the French state now recognize the colonial moment and the colonial history and, say we are sorry or that was bad. But it's a kind of decolonization to recolonize, so it's an acknowledgement of the colonial past and some of the, abuse, but in fact, to bring a new form of colonization in the name of democracy and equality, which is effectively erase the fact that it's totally asymmetrical, that the Kanak have been marginalized, not only in terms of the vote, but in terms effectively on employment, housing, health, all this, they are really colonized. Really, it's a colonial situation. So yes, the French, but it's the same thing in Guadeloupe, Martinique, or Guyana, or the Pacific Island. It's the same thing. The French state cannot
As part of
renounce.
the as part of the ongoing election campaign that's running in France for the Assemblée Nationale for MPs, the candidate for extreme right party Rassemblement National in Réunion Island said that French people should leave, and Réunion Island people and people from outermost regions should just leave colonization and slavery to the past, and that we should not celebrate the 20th of June, the celebration of the end of slavery. Is this as a way as well to leave this in the past and not think about current affairs? Is there anything else behind that?
Yeah, I mean the move. I mean the incredible struggle that was led in France to for French state and French society to recognize slavery, that their activity, their complicity, and really concrete participation, complicity was very long. Was very long. And in 2001, slave trade and slavery were recognized as crime against humanity. But then it's constantly resisting the French state and going back. I mean this is also a performative act. Yes, there was slavery. Slavery was bad, but that's it. No reparation, no land reform, nothing. So it's pure performative act. And of course, in Réunion or elsewhere, you do have also local people. I mean, not everyone in Réunion, Mayotte, or Guyana is for autonomy or independence. You have also people who want to remain, under the domination of the French, and they will, declare things like that. There is a very strong the ideological struggle is if we put this in the past, we say this is the past, okay, done with that. Then you don't speak about the afterlives of slavery and colonization. You don't speak about the present, in which way they are still, affecting, impacting the present. So you put it in the past, was bad, okay, done, chapter close, and let's move on. So you don't talk about poverty. You don't talk about the fact that the land is still in the hand of the same people. You don't talk, about inequality, injustices, and structural racism.
And you just said that some people in these in these islands or these regions want to remain French, and others want independence. It brings me a parallel in history. During the time of the War of Independence in Algeria, Frantz Fanon from Martinique went and joined the Liberation Front of Algeria. But in the same around the same period of time, Aimé Césaire was working to make Martinique a department, a French region, and to actually seek the benefits of being French and not only be a colony that only has to pay taxes with nothing in return. Um, could we
Mm.
just like spend some time on this and see because these are two different views that are fair enough, no? Like one wants complete independence, and the other one says, "Well, at least give us something in return." I remember that it took almost 50 years for France after the departementalisation, after making Martinique a region. It took at least 50 years for France to actually give the benefits and social security, retirement,
Oh yeah, I
and
mean
all of
equality,
these
even
things.
yeah, I mean equality of minimum wage or family allowance, where in fact this equality was reached toward the 1990s. So quite late, 1946 is the start of the Statistical Department, and late 1990s. In the meantime, more unemployment, a higher cost of living. So even they finally this were equal to those who are the minimum wage in France. It was not much at the because in fact there has no been no development of this island. It's still monoculture. Everything come from France. So it was like that. But I have to say, I mean, what Césaire and other, when they ask, it was in this idea that existed also in Algeria or even in Vietnam and other colony. At the beginning movement, anti-colonial movement, where okay, let's take France to its word, to its own word, liberty, equality, fraternity, and we will see. And effectively, they saw quite quickly because Césaire attacked departmentalization quite quickly. When you read his political speeches at the National Assembly, he very denounced, it very quickly, and he showed that in fact the French state is in fact using departmentalization to recolonize, to colonize in a different way, right? Acknowledging that effectively even the colonial status can no longer work. And you have the right from France, who will send emissaries to this island and to convince the local right that in fact they were against the local conservative, were against the departmentalization because they were afraid of bigger salaries, whatever, to convince them that departmentalization could be in fact a tool of recolonization, which what happened, which what happened. And so this is why by the 1950, late 1950s, you have new movement for what was called autonomy, political, democratic, and popular autonomy, or for independence. Because the disappointment with the departmentalization was quite quick, came very quickly. Um, and liberal decision were imposed, closure of factories, the destruction of any, kind of local industry by the 1970s was quite destroyed. I mean, when you read, I mean, this island more or less fed themselves, produce their food, and by the 70s, mid 70s, it was no longer the case. So in fact, there was more colonization after departmentalization, if we may say that, before, in terms of also more French people coming, more white French. Today, you have more white in this territory than you ever had them, under the colonial status. They come, they are, civil servant, entrepreneur, whatever, they come because it's the tropic. The weather is better. You can go to the beach every afternoon, things like that. And also they benefit from the privilege of being white and French. So this is also what's happening. So Fanon, of course, embraced Algeria, but he explained in Black Skin, White Mask that kind of alienation you are talking about. He explained in the way in which colonization make the colonized wanting, to whiten themselves, to approach. And so we see effectively, we still see that in this territory of some people who were afraid. But I have to say that the French state did a lot to bring, the fear of autonomy and independence. In the Caribbean, always saying, look at Haiti, this is what you want to become, you know. And so this kind of constant comparison, okay, you may be poor and so on, but you are French. And today it's very important, Maxime. You have a French passport. You may be black and all, but you have a French passport, right? You're not like an Asian in the Caribbean, or not like a Brazilian for the Guyanese, or not like a Malagasy in Réunion or Mayotte. You're French. So it's kind of this little benefits of dependency, of domination.
I think it gives us a good segue into the situation in Mayotte right now, because it's actually an aggregate of all of this. Mayotte is part of the Comoros archipelago. So this group of islands had the opportunity via a referendum to decide whether they wanted to remain French or become French, more so, or be independent. And most of the islands chose to form the Islamic Republic of Comoros, and Mayotte decided to be part of France and become a French department, a province. Could you explain a bit how this came about, and then maybe we can go into more of the
Well,
consequences of
in
the choice in
Mayotte,
Mayotte?
what the campaign to remain French and to become a department was led both by the army, which was, there have been a French Legion, army quite for a long time in Mayotte. So with some interest, military interest, and also an elite, a local elite, which spent a lot of time in Réunion at the time and became, like part of the what Fanon could call the national bourgeoisie, even though it's not really a bourgeoisie, but people who live off, the benefit that France gave them, and who have also internalized some form of racism, even toward their own people. And so, they really fought for that referendum, and so the French state agreed, and Mayotte remained France. But also, it was so Mayotte itself had a lot of of problem, because mercenary like Bob Denard intervened, quite often with coup against the president and kill and assassination and so on and so forth. So you had also this kind of armed intervention. By the French state, even though it was not open, but these were French mercenaries, so it was also this kind of
Yeah, but
uh,
Bob Denard went
against
to the extent to removing a president and then being hired by the president he removed to put him back in, and remove the guy he
yeah,
put
there
in
was
his
all these
place.
things, so it was a moment where French mercenaries, or the French state, even secret service, were really directly intervening in African state, the Comoro or other, to provoke coup d'etat, assassination, or whatever, because the French state is really a pro-colonial, is a colonial state. But what happened in Mayotte, so it became a department, but also in 1995, Balladur, who was prime minister in France, imposed a visa. And until then, you could, circulate among the island, which has always been, connected with each other. It's really, you got family here and you go there. And that started effectively, it affected really deeply the relation, the archipelagic relation that existed for a long time, and encouraged a form of ethno-nationalism, created Maori versus Comorian, created that and fabricated that
Yeah,
identity.
because there was local trade amongst the islands, and people would use their boats, like kwasa kwasa boats, and then go from an island to the
I
other
mean, you could
and
have a
trade and
sister in
travel and so on.
Anjouan.
No?
Yeah, you could have a sister in Anjouan and some nieces and nephew in another, island, and you will move from one island to the other. All these people speak the same language, are connected also with the same form of Islam and religion. And so language, religion, also a code that preceded the French civil code, where women had some power, could own property, and the French civil code transformed that in the
Can we
name of,
stop on this and explain it a little bit? It's a very interesting point, actually.
well, I mean, in the usually colonizer arrive and decide and think that the society they colonize have no concept of social and political organization or concept of property and inheritance, and that they have to impose. Or if they have some concept, they are seen by the colonizer as being backward, not very fully developed. So women in the Comoro Island were owners of the land, not the man, and so that was, from mother to daughter, which, and so that was the French broke that, imposed a form of private property that favored men, but also, and also the way in which it will be the French tribunal, the French court that will decide, to who own that piece of land or that house. Whereas before, it was this, they were like local tribunal, if we want to use that word, even if it's not tribunal, and your local judge, I mean, local
The caddy,
person. Hmm?
the caddies.
Yeah, yeah, or the caddy, the people occupying their position of effectively looking at the different, conflict in a family or between, different, neighbors, and working this out. And the French impose, of course, the French law with everything. So
And and
uh,
and what were the
deprive.
consequences of changing the law and making it that it's not only women that own the land anymore, but anyone can own land
Yeah,
in
but
Mayotte?
because I mean the point of course is disorganization of the social making and cultural making of the society, and imposing the norms of the Western society. Um, but as we know, I mean, the women in Mayotte have been very strongly pro-France, also very strongly. So there is also a gender, the analysis of the gendered organization, Mayotte must look at different, I mean, as we say, intersectional. But the most important impact of the French colonization has been really the disorganization of communal, relation, of social and family arrangement. That, of course, for the French people, look like totally backward or not very strong, and so they impose even in terms of family, and you had everywhere, even in Réunion, Martinique, and Guadeloupe. Also, you had ways of, for instance, adopting children of, in the family. Let's say you have a sister, she does not want to take care of the children. You take them with you; they become yours, and you don't have to go through the tribunal and the court and the police for that. That was, all this. The impact, the enforcement was very strong on, like effective disciplining a society and making it French, whitening it in Mayotte very strongly. So a lot of the problem today are also the consequence of this disorganization, of the fact that children are left to themselves, that you break family. For instance, among the migrants, the children who are born in Mayotte until now, because the French state want to change that, are French by birth, but they expel the parents, so the children remain by themselves, and of course they get together, in a form of, to protect themselves, and these are called gang, dangerous gang by the state, but they have been produced by the policy, by the state policy. They have been, it was not
And
like
this has
that.
been going for so long as well that they were left alone when they were kids, but now they are teenagers and young adults, and they are becoming more
Yeah.
and more angry, I guess, against
They are
the,
angry,
the
they have no
situation.
future, they have no job, they live, outside of the society, there are no school for them. So you have that, you have also a strong militarization of the society, as I say, you have It's a military base. So, and today you have a lot of effectively racism being encouraged by the state, because by making Mayotte French, even if Mayotte is very poor, it's still less poor than other country in Africa and elsewhere. So you have migrants from other Comoro Island, but also migrants now from Central Africa trying to
If I'm
reach
not
Mayotte.
mistaken, Mayotte is 4 times poorer than France, than mainland France, but it's 10 times richer than its neighbors.
Yeah, that is neighbors. So, I mean, but the colonization has also uh, really deeply disrupted the life in this region of the world. There was also a lot of connection with Madagascar. Madagascar is not far. You had a lot, like historically, people from the north of Madagascar establishing themselves in the Comoro Island, and people from the Bantu community from East Africa. All this kind of arrangement, which I'm not idealizing, that's not the point, but people working out their own life has been totally broken and disrupted by French colonization, imposing effectively ethno-nationalism in Mayotte, as like Madagascar away, Comoro Island away, African away. So it's kind of little France, little bit of France with nothing like France, as you say, very poor, not at all the same condition of living than in France, but nonetheless, what they have is like a French passport and the protection and the fact that the state, will send cops and police and even special forces to bring, order, as I say, and arrest the gang leader. So it's a dead hand. It's a situation that will never be resolved because of the French created that situation and now will not get out. But again, I remind ourselves that you have gas and oil being
Yes,
found
of course.
close,
It's
and
been found
so
not too long ago, actually, a few years
yeah,
ago, off the coast of Mayotte.
yeah,
Yeah.
and this is
And
also
so,
in
what
the
what what would be the solution in Mayotte? What could be done to
I
improve
don't
the
see.
situation?
I see a dead hand because I don't see how the French state does not want to give up that island and does not want to bring some autonomy, and is not really disturbed by what's happening. After all, they send the special forces to kick out migrants. I mean, who are in a total terrible situation and very badly treated. So, what I see, for instance, and what I have seen, what this is my understanding of what's happening in Guadeloupe or Pacific Island or Kanaky or Martinique, Réunion or Mayotte, is that there was a fear of the anti-colonial movement, a great fear in the French state, and the French state crushed this movement by, as I say, constant censorship, constant jailing, constant, like brutal repression and assassination. And now that they think, I mean, the French state think that there was no longer this threat of, what they were afraid of, like the young people in Guadeloupe and Martinique will follow the Cuban example because of Cuba right there. And in the Indian Ocean, the movement in Mozambique and Madagascar. So will Réunion join, so they were very afraid of that, very afraid of, what was happening in the world. So they really crush any kind of movement. Now I will say that it's a military control of the population. That if there is some protest, they send the special forces and the police. They beat people, but there is no concern anymore for this the people of this island. There is no progress. There is no present. I mean, there is no offer of
And
what could be.
and how sustainable is this? Because I remember in 2009 there were big
Mm.
uprisings in Guadeloupe and then in Martinique and then in Guyane, and people were complaining about the fact that the life is too expensive on these islands, salaries are too low, so you paid a very low salary as if you were living in a village in like in a very remote area of mainland France, but the cost of living is higher than in Paris. So it's very difficult to actually make ends meet if you're not a civil servant that get 30 to 50% more on their salary. Then it's difficult for normal citizens to actually survive on these islands. And at the end of this uprising, there were a few promises, a few products where the price of on a few products were limited, but um, nothing seems to have changed
Yeah.
after that. So
No, nothing
what is
seems
going to
changed.
happen?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you have had a lot of this anger and protest, just through since 1946, since the department status, a lot, incredible everywhere, and they were constantly crushed. And sometime a promise, sometime nothing, sometimes just a repression, and nothing followed every time. So it's like until next time. No, it's as I say, there is no solution. The French state has no solution because the solution will be to leave that, to give, to let the people decide what they want and how they want it. But they also increase the dependency. For instance, in Réunion, there is a say, that if a plane and cargo will stop, we will have just 1 week to
Mhm.
survive. 1 week. After that, no more medicine, no more food, or whatever will arrive. Not enough, at least, because there are nonetheless some production, but not enough. So effectively, very high cost of living, soil being polluted and contaminated. We know the case of the chlordecone in the Antilles, but there's something in Réunion. The crisis of
Mhm.
water. I mean, in Guadeloupe, like no water, like no decent,
In
clean
Mayotte as
drinking
well.
water. Mayotte is a huge crisis of water. So yes, it's a totally, and let's not speak about the climate disaster that will also effectively impact this very fragile territory in terms of, like protection
Yeah, yeah.
from this
Mayotte, I
climate
think, is one of
disaster.
the only 5 islands in the world to have two coral reefs around the core island, which is almost unique. Yeah, only five in the world. So there's
Yeah,
something here to be protected, and
yeah, there
maybe even
is.
the population of Mayotte could live off like luxury tourism and ecotourism, and there's potential there. No, I mean
There are
for the
potential,
people of
but
Mayotte.
not possibly because you will have to have a segregated space. Absolutely, because what you will do, that will provide perhaps some job, but as gardener and domestics, or cleaners or cook, whatever, but not in terms of effectively. This they will not own this resource. It will come again from elsewhere. People will be, transform. I mean, you have also a destruction of what we could call the peasantry and local form of industry. Really destruction. People lose totally. So you are dependent, entirely dependent of what the wealthy are doing. Effectively opening a resort or whatever. But this will not even absorb all the young people arriving on the market every day. Every year. Sorry, every year. And then also because of our young people aspire to better things than becoming, a cleaner in a hotel. They want more.
Yeah, definitely.
There is a very strong feeling of, things are bad. And there is, if you're not rich, but when I mean rich, I mean if your family is not really a middle class, you cannot leave the island. And even if you go and to do higher education in France or elsewhere, you will not be able to go back to your country because you will not find the job that is up to your training. And even if there is a job up to your training, it will be given first to the French white. So
And there is like 50% unemployment for people under the age of 25 years old anyway. So
yeah, so a
the
huge
pool of
feeling of of a dead hand, and that the French state has no wish to transform that, because and also the fact that I mean, if you think about Mayotte and Réunion in the Indian Ocean, or the Pacific Island, Tahiti and the Pacific Island, or Kanaky in the Pacific, I mean, how far farther can you be from France? This does not make sense. I mean, Mayotte and Réunion are in the Indian Ocean, which is one of the most, very fast changing region. And France is no longer totally hegemonic in that place. It was hegemonic with the British and the American, North American, but I don't know, 70s, 80s. But today in the Indian Ocean, they have to do, with India, with the Gulf state, with Australia, with China, with Korea. For instance, Korea, own a lot of mines in Madagascar and elsewhere. So many, different actors, capitalists rushing or, establishing things. So France is not also very, no longer that strong, and in the Pacific also as well. And so there is also a feeling of being tied to a declining power and a declining country that has
So,
already,
so based on all of this, there's one thing I can't resolve is the fact that, for example, in Martinique, there's an independence leader called Alfred Marijan, and he ran on several occasions for election, and he ended up winning and becoming president of the region of Martinique, but still nothing really changed. And now we see that Réunion Island, Martinique, Guadeloupe, almost all these regions, Mayotte, one of them as well, vote for Rassemblement National, which is the extreme right force in France. So what do you think they expect from this party? What do you think this party will bring them?
Okay, many things. I mean, they vote for the Rassemblement National in elections that do not matter. For instance, the European election for them don't matter for whatever reason. But sorry, Réunion or Martinique and Guadeloupe send, mostly left people to the National Assembly from NUPES. And now certainly, they would be from the new Popular Front. But effectively, the vote for the national for the Rassemblement National is real. Also, cannot be just put aside. In Mayotte, it's a real concrete vote in every election, presidential, European, local, is very strong. So because effectively the National Front propose, uh, you know, it, hide its racism, but also offer to the people the possibility of finding some consolation by being more racist towards other people. So, for instance, in Réunion, will be towards Comorian people from the Comoros or from Madagascar. In Mayotte, it will be again Comorian or Central African. In Guadeloupe and Martinique, against people from Haiti or from Dominique. In Guyana, from people from Brazil or Suriname. So, everyone will have, that what the National Front offer is, racism. And so racism that, how can I say, protect you from feeling that you are, totally effectively dispossessed because you will have someone, below you that you can insult. So that also it's a regression of also the left movement in this territory. This has to be said. This has to be said. Um,
Yeah, and in Mayotte, there's something a bit very crazy to me is the fact that 90% of the population is Muslim, and they vote for a party that doesn't want
yeah,
Muslims in
totally
France. And
Islamophobic. Yeah.
if Mayotte is part of France, then they should go out away of
Yeah,
Mayotte.
yeah,
Maybe
yeah, but that the strength of racism. Racism. It's not just white against black or that we have to understand. It goes further than that because it can offer even Muslim people in Mayotte, support to the most Islamophobic and racist party in France. By by thinking that the National Front will protect them from those whom they see as below them, people from the sister island or from Central Africa. Same thing in Réunion, like people would think that Maoré. I mean, I remember, meeting a guy from Réunion like 3 weeks ago And he came to me and said, "Oh, madam, I always voted for the left. And I was absolutely, with the anti-colonial movement. But in the next election, I'm voting, for Bardella." And I'm like, looking at him and say, "Why?" He said, "Because of people from Mayotte." I said, "But what do they do?" He could not say anything. It was just the fact, that fact. That fact was enough. There was no concrete thing. There was no real argument. Just that, the satisfaction of saying, "But we have been French for longer, and we are really the true French of the Indian Ocean." That's really alienation, that Fanon or other talk about, and even even Césaire talk about in discourse on colonialism. It's something, but it's, as I say, it's also the weakness of anti-colonial party today, and the necessity of renewing the anti-colonial practice and discourse, because of course you cannot have the same analysis than in the 1960s, 1970s. Things have changed, so you have to base um, the critique of the form of colonization that is being, enacted today by the French state. You have to renew your analysis. You had a lot of
So it's
analysis in these years. They were very good. They were very good in 1970s. Very good, very, very thorough. You don't have anything like that today.
Yeah, it seems as in general the left has lost this ideological appeal and the appeal to actually find ways to actually speak to people and analyze situations. So if we were to actually advise left-wing forces in France that are now running their campaign, what elements of program should they or could they put forward in order to actually speak to people in outermost regions?
I would say, like we have to go back to the question of land. Really, who own the land? I mean, if you don't have the land, you have like, what you're going to do? The land and water. Land and water. I mean, renew. And also, for instance, really thinking, I remember when I was working on a project of a museum in Réunion between 2002 and 2010. Every time, something was suggested by the architect, I say, how will it be in 10 years? Like what? So the question, to go back to your question, is like, where do we want to go? We are, for instance, you're in the Caribbean, right? You're surrounded by a new world. I mean, a world that's changing very fast. Where do you want to go? With whom do you want to do something? Same thing in the Pacific. And the Kanak are the idea. The Kanak say we were Pacific people. We were people of the Pacific. We traded with people in Wallis and Futuna. We traded with people far away, and now we are like locked into, we are. French does not want us to move around. Same thing, for Réunion. We are in the Indian Ocean. How we like this is one of the most fastest changing region in the world because of the oil production, of the war in the Middle East, and what's happening in Africa, and the climate change which is coming. But we are still, like, oh no, but France will no, but France will be there, but France will not be there constantly. So what I will say is like to take the situation seriously and analyze it with the what's is under our eyes, and as more people, because the number of people are bigger, of course, than before. Less in Martinique and Guadeloupe because the migration was much more important. The French state took more people from Martinique and Guadeloupe. Guyana is between Suriname and Brazil. I mean, this is the longest border of a French border with Brazil. So all this, you have to think, okay, what do we do? What will be, how are we going to develop ourselves? And it's not possible to depend, on a state which is thousands of kilometers away. Everything arrived by plane, the civil servant, all the administrative apparatus, on the plane. This is madness. There is something mad, absolutely absurd. Not mad,
To be like
absurd.
luxury camping.
Yeah, yeah. It's an absurdity. It's an absurdity. You have, civil servant arriving in Réunion. They don't know the history, they don't know the language, they have like no clue. Something in Kanaky, of course, and something elsewhere, in Mayotte. And then suddenly, they will make decision as a prefect or whatever. This is madness. It's really madness. There is a really, and it was madness, from the beginning of civilization, and it's becoming even, more madness because the world is very changing very fast, and and France is still, looking at this territory as in with a colonial lens.
And so what can be done from now on then? Because, for example, there's a thing is outermost French regions used to have a voice in Brussels because they could elect an MEP. There were one MEP per big region. You had one for the Indian Ocean with Mayotte and Réunion Island. You had one for the Pacific. You had one for the Caribbean, for the Atlantic, and so on and so forth. So you always had an MP that had to campaign in these regions and actually had to show the work done. Now that this has changed, I think not in these elections, the previous ones in 2017, if I'm not mistaken, we now have a situation where we used to have a representative of each of these regions, and now we have one Rassemblement National MEP from Guadeloupe, and then another Rassemblement National MEP from Réunion Island, and then Younous Omarjee from the France Insoumise, also from Réunion Island. So basically, on paper, only Réunion Island and Guadeloupe are represented in the European Parliament, and because we know Rassemblement National doesn't go to Brussels to actually work, basically only Réunion Island is represented. So how can these regions actually have a voice? Because now it leaves them in a position where they have to go through France to have a voice in Brussels, having met with people representing the regions in Brussels. There used to be the House of Outermost Regions, a French outermost region, which imploded and disappeared. But when it existed, some people were explaining that they had to lobby the French representatives more than the Brussels bubble, because even the French didn't know about them. So now that we are basically left with only these French representatives to represent the voice of these regions, how can these regions actually protect themselves? I see, for example, the Canary Islands and other outermost regions of other European powers. They have an office in Brussels where they can actually directly try and influence EU policy to protect their interests. So how could these regions actually do something and still have a voice?
Well, you're right, but this really happened. I mean, the kind of a desire of the French state to dilute any difference, what Césaire called the dilution in some abstract universalism. And that dilution happened also with in every election. You used to have the election, for example, legislative election or other. You will have local candidates that were not attached to a French national party. They were of their, they were candidates for their own party and own movement. And then they will join or not join a group when they will arrive at the National Assembly. But they had their own program. It was not the program of the National Party. And they were also, I remember, in the 70s, able to impose to national party for the presidential election. We will call, to vote for you if you accept our program. But so they were writing the program. It did not come from, they were their own author. Whether we agree with it, that's not the point. They were the author of their own program. This is what they wanted. And they say, okay, they show it to the different, candidate on the left for the presidency and say, okay, what's your position? And when there was the Programme Commun, the common program, in the 80s that led to the election of Mitterrand, they wrote the part on the outmost region. It was not the French who did it. And today, to answer to your question, yeah, there is a dilution. I mean, diluted, in the French national uh, demand or whatever, and you see when you have French elected, I mean French, elected people coming to this place, they have like no clue about what they are, where they arrive, they have no idea. They just, say, okay, your culture, your identity, but they don't know very well what's happening, you know, because there is no longer also in the French left that education about what, this new form of colonization. So yes, there is a need to recuperate more autonomy, autonomy in the sense of political form of sovereignty. You know, we will decide what we need and what we want and how we want it. And that is very important. Yeah, that's very important. But
Well,
it
I
will come back. You do have movement, but effectively it's very difficult right now.
thanks a lot. I think this is all for today. But thanks a lot for your
Well,
time,
thank
for
you.
this analysis, and it was a great pleasure being able to
Well,
to talk
thank
with you.
you. Thank you for having me.